Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining our Zoom conference today, where we can learn more about the constitutional amendments that are going to be coming up on the election on November the 13th. Like you, I'm here today also to learn a little bit more, get more clarity on what's going to be happening today. So I'm Michael Meir. I'm an agent with New York Life Insurance, also a member of the chamber. So I'm glad you all have joined us today. At this time, like we do with all meetings, I like to start off with a prayer and a pledge. So bow your heads with me and pray. Heavenly Father, thank you today for giving us the time and the opportunity after this storm to come together as a community to learn more about the operations in our state and our parish to help us to proceed. Please watch over and bless these speakers that have joined us today. Give them the knowledge and the wisdom to speak forth and to help us to understand, to make the right decisions for ourselves, our families, and our parish. We ask these things in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And if y'all have a flag in y'all's office that y'all can, well, there we have it on the screen. Please join me in saying our pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. So trying to bring everything back in the best we can in these situations. Just want to go ahead. I want to recognize our elected officials that are going to be joining us on the call today. We have Representative Bob Owen, Representative Mary Dubison, Representative Mark Wright, and Dr. Charles Preston. And if there's anyone that I missed, I apologize. So just kind of load some housekeeping. We at the Chamber today, we're partnering with the North Shore Business Council, the North Shore Community Foundation, and the North Shore Home Builders Association, as well as the St. Tammany Corporation to help share information with the entire community for this meeting. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be posted on the Chamber's YouTube chamber later. You will receive an email this afternoon with the recording. There is going to be a question and answer button on your screen. Please ask all your questions in the question and answer only so that they don't get lost. So, with that, I'd like to at this time introduce our chamber and president CEO, Lacey Osborne. I'd like to speak to you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We are doing our job in getting the information out about these constitutional amendments. And I want to join Michael in thanking our elected officials for joining us today. And of course, Robert Travis Scott, you help us do our job and we do our best to help you do your job. I will be very brief. We here at the Chamber, we are in the process of our board nominations. The formal notice went out last week, and we are now the parish-wide chamber, and as such, we increased the number of directors on our board. This year, the turnover was low on, we only have 4 spots to fill, but I want to explain that next year, it will be more like 8 to 10 spots to fill. And we have not yet announced our advisory board members for 2022. So you can look forward to hearing that probably sometime next week. As you know, we also have on this ballot a 0.04 cent sales tax for consideration to support our criminal justice system. We had a webinar planned that had to be postponed, and it's now set for October 5th at 9 a.m. And we have several other events coming up. Our Business Expo was rescheduled 5 times. So we have all been scurrying around with rescheduling. It's going to be October 14th. So it's creeping up on us. We also have a golf tournament at the end of this month and a clay shoot at Covey Rise coming up. So in addition to our business support programs, we have these fundraisers. So again, thank you for joining us. I am going to now turn over the speaker to Representative Mark Wright. And Mark, thank you for all you did to make this happen today.
Thanks, Lacey. Good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to take a part in this, both as a representative during the session. I think we did some strong work A lot of credit goes to Speaker Schexnayder for beginning this process a long time ago. I know we've got a lot in front of us right now between COVID and hurricane recovery, but these amendments on the ballot, and it's important that we get the word out about what we're about to do. So I appreciate the Chamber, North Shore Business Council, and the home builders willing to do this, and for our guests who I'll introduce for coming on and helping educate. Representative Clay Schexnayder is the 69th Speaker of the Louisiana House of Representatives. He was first elected to the body in 2011 and serves District 81, representing the citizens of Ascension, Livingston, St. James, and St. John parishes. Speaker Schexnayder has done a lot of work in the House of Representatives, including previously serving on Ways and Means and Chair of Agriculture. Jason DeCuir is a co-owner and partner with Advantis Consulting, a leading tax services firm in Louisiana that uniquely delivers customizable end-to-end solutions that range from turnkey compliance services to high-level planning. At Advantis, Jason heads up the government affairs and dispute resolution and oversees business development. He also serves on the board of directors for Louisiana Association of Business and Industry. Robert Travis Scott became president of Public Affairs Research in January 2011. He has 40 years of experience dealing with public policy issues, whether as a journalist, researcher, commentator, analyst, and nonprofit manager. He's author of many PAR reports on state budgeting, taxes, economic development, open governance, ethics, and healthcare. So I'll turn it over to our guest, and thanks again for coming.
Thank y'all for having me. I really do appreciate it. It's an honor to be able to travel the state and do these one-on-ones with people, and also doing the Zooms. And I appreciate Mark. Mark is for the North Shore. He is a true soldier on that side, and a lieutenant as well to help us be able to push a lot of good legislation through these past 2 years that COVID has kind of covered up the great work that our House has done, or the legislature has done. It's really been a real success. We've gotten a lot of things accomplished, from tort reform to now some tax reform stuff. In 2012, when I entered the House, I can tell you that those two issues were always something that was up front and out as a bill that we tried desperately to be able to pass and to try to make things better, and we just never could quite get it over the hump. And we kept working and becoming Speaker. I told those guys whenever we were elected there and we put everybody in place that that was two things that I had set my goal out, and as a House we had set our goals really high to be able to accomplish these things. And we put them out there, and the North Shore delegation has done a great job in supporting us in those endeavors and getting those things done. With that being said, the first year we did put out a bill about streamlining some tax reform, and it got a lot of pushback, which we knew it would. We got it to the floor. We got it out of committee, got it to the floor, and we had everybody that was having issues with it come and get with us. All the locals, the Sheriff's Association, the School Boards Association, Police Jury, and LMA, all had some issues. And my goal was to bring everybody to the table and try to find a way to fix this and move things forward. That's the way we had accomplished tort reform, and that's the way I wanted to accomplish this. So we did. We brought them to the table, and thanks to Jason DeCuir and a committee, a task force that we had put together, we had turned that bill into a study resolution, and we created a task force which had all of those locals on it, and some business on there as well, local business, industry on there, to be able to look at this and find a way to move forward. We did that. I think, Jason, am I right? We met for about 30 days on that. We invited guests in, we invited people in to speak about it, and we tried to make sure that we covered the area of that streamlined reform that we wanted to do. And as it went through, and I told Jason and them, I said, it looks good, but I said, man, this is going to be tough to get people to get behind. This is a really sticky issue, and we were lucky. Jason and that task force did a great job at getting it to the final day of the meeting, the last day, and they brought it to a vote on how to move forward. And I can tell you that vote, which it shocked me, was unanimous across the board. Everybody had joined in and said, this is something that we definitely need to look at to make Louisiana better, make sure that we are protecting not only our taxpayers, but also our local businesses. And so we pushed forward. As we pushed forward, we went to the locals again and brought them back to the table and said, all right, here's where we need to start. We met quite a few times and put together what you see in front of you now is a amendment that's on the ballot for November that I think is going to change the way Louisiana looks across the country, and it's going to help us be a lot more pleasant for businesses to look at, to want to come to Louisiana. So we got that bill together and we put it out there, and I went to the locals. I met with the sheriffs. I met with everybody, and I gave them my word as we put this bill out there that we would not make any changes to that bill or put any amendments on that bill unless we approach them first. And I think that was the big confidence booster in their holster, that they felt confident that we were not going to go in and try to swindle or sideswipe anybody. So we got the bill done. We got it passed. We got it out there. And I can tell you that this bill or this constitutional amendment, which is Constitutional Amendment 1, is something that, looking back in my short tenure there, as far as 10 years, this is a huge accomplishment when it comes to tax reform. And I'm sure Jason and Mr. Scott could talk more about that as we move forward. But, it's a big step in the means that it is tax reform, but it's a small step in the right direction in an overall package that we want to push forward. I think this is something that is going to be really important for us. We're one of only 2 states that have multiple tax collectors out there. It's rigorous right now for our local businesses out there to, and y'all know this as well, being local chamber and businesses out there, that you have to deal with so many different tax collectors out there across the state. I think it's 56, if I'm correct on it, different ones that we have to pay into. And me being a small business owner, I've felt that pain as well. This is something that's going to make it much easier. It's not anything that's going to slow the process down. It's actually going to speed it up. And the good thing is the locals will be in charge. The constitutional amendment that we have puts members of the board on there, which consist of the Sheriff's Association, the School Board Association, the Police Jury Association, LMA. The governor has one appointment. The Department of Revenue has an appointment on it, and the Senate President and the Speaker of the House has an appointment on there. And it pretty much, it puts the locals in charge of it. They oversee it, and I think moving forward, this is something that's going to be really, really good for us and for our taxpayers as well. Jason, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's accurate. And, I also wanted to echo your comments and commending Representative Mark Wright. He's on the front lines in Ways and Means, and I'm gonna tell you, he digs into the details. I've sat down and read more tax bills with Representative Wright than most people would understand, but he really gets after it. And y'all are in great shape to have a member of his caliber in the mix and actually bringing a lot of great ideas to the table. So I've enjoyed working with him. And then, as the speaker was mentioning, the commission, Robert Travis Scott had the fun privilege of sitting on those commission meetings too. And those meetings would go long. In fact, the speaker would look around and says, "Oh boy, I guess we're gonna have to order lunch again today," because those meetings would sometimes. But he's exactly right. I think this process that we went through, the first thing we had to do is build trust, and we had to build credibility that we could do this. We could be like every other state in the country in terms of having a centralized system, a system that's not archaic, that's difficult to do business in our state, and one that businesses have to navigate so many systems in order to comply or file their sales tax returns. And so I think we all recognize that it was time to move in this direction, and bringing everybody together. We were able to do this. Obviously, with the constitutional amendment, it takes 70 votes on the House side and 2/3 on the Senate side. So there's no way we would have gotten there without the working relationship across all aisles. As the speaker was mentioning, right now, for those of you all who aren't always in the weeds on this stuff, we basically have 4 different entities out there that you have to navigate in order to file or remit your sales tax. You have the Uniform Local Sales Tax Board. If you do anything online, you have a Remote Sellers Commission. You have the Department of Revenue. And then, depending on how many parishes, as the speaker mentioned, you could be dealing with over 50 plus different local collectors. So basically all we're doing is taking that and rolling it up into one commission, such that businesses now can file in one place, pick up the phone and call one place, get advice and policy from that commission. And so if this amendment were to pass, it removes the barrier from the Constitution. Simply, that's all it does, removes the barrier from the Constitution to allow Louisiana to have one entity. And this will be a win-win. I think it's a win for business, a big win for businesses, because I think it'll be easier to navigate and comply with our sales tax system. But it's also a win for government. And the reason it's a win for government right now in our system, and I'm not going to get into the whole Wayfair case, but some of you may have heard of it. In order to get and collect the money online that's due Louisiana, and you now have a lot of out-of-state retailers competing with local businesses, and some of those businesses may not have to pay the sales tax, like if you went into a bricks and mortar right there, in St. Tammany. And so the Supreme Court basically said that the only way states can require these out-of-state retailers to pay the same amount of sales tax as brick and mortars or collect the same amount is if you have a simplified and streamlined system. Right now, Louisiana does not have that. I just mentioned the fragmented system that we have. And since we're sitting on sort of those uncertain legal grounds, if you will, it would only take one taxpayer, one out-of-state retailer, to file suit against Louisiana, and the state and or local governments could be having to refund money to taxpayers because we're not collecting it in a constitutional manner. So this will also solve that problem as well. But I do think, as the speaker mentioned, with it's just us in Colorado. Alaska doesn't have a centralized system, but I don't really count Alaska. So we're kind of the laughing stock of the country until we get this fixed, and this will absolutely increase our perception in a positive way, and also move us up in a lot of the national rankings. And so obviously we're looking for all of you all's support for this constitutional amendment, and we are here to answer any questions that you may have about the system. And as the speaker mentioned, there is another part. I mean, there's some more homework we have to do. Once this passes, then we've got to, as he likes to say, we got to go out and build the system through legislation. I know Mark will be integral in that as well, but I know we can get that done. But we can't even build that system until we remove this barrier from the Constitution. So Lacey and the chamber, I really appreciate you all you all having us. And I'm going to stick around to see if there's any real pointed or specific questions that the speaker or I may be able to answer for you, at least as it relates to Constitutional Amendment number 1.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Speaker. And Jason, we appreciate your time. And we are going to have the question and answers at the end of the meeting. So if y'all could stick around, we would appreciate that. And at this time, I'd like to go ahead and move on to Mr. Scott, that's going to go and discuss amendments 2 through 4 as well. And also, if you could read the amendments, if you could, before you discuss them. We had a few comments earlier on, so people know exactly what the amendment is, as we move forward. Thank you.
Well, great. Well, thanks for having me. And I'm speaking to you from the 16th floor of a building overlooking the state capitol. And it's a privilege to be. I wish I were there in St. Tammany, and I wish these conditions weren't the same. I think one of the things I love the most is getting out and, seeing people face to face. I'll really be glad when this period of time is over. And I really appreciate Lacey and over the years how much help she's given us and getting us out there in front of people and all the St. Tammany chamber. Really always happy to participate with y'all just year round. Terrific. And I just want to say that they just talked about amendment number 1. And of course, I'm going to talk about the rest of the amendments, but I am not only very familiar with this amendment, but PAR's research over the years has shown that this type of step forward is absolutely critical if we're going to move into the 20th century. I sometimes like to joke that this moves us into the late 20th century, at least gets us that far. But this would not have happened. Amendment 1 would not have happened except for the fact that the House Speaker basically made up his mind that this was going to take place. I mean, when you really get down to it fundamentally in the political world and the policy world, that's what really made this happen. And he put the right people in place to move this forward. He got all the right people in the room. He made them feel comfortable, and he made it work. So we have that on the amendment. And I can just tell you that years of PAR research would tell you that this would be great for our image. It would be great for business. It would be, and I think it's going to be much better for the local governments as well. And there are a lot of safeguards in Amendment 1 to protect the interests of the local governments. And that's something we also wanted to see in this. So please, we're objective on amendments usually, but I think number 1 is definitely a way to go. But you've got 4 amendments on the ballot. And at the Public Affairs Research Council, we've been around since 1950, sometimes known as the Constitution people because of our efforts to try to promote good constitutional reform. But every time there's these constitutional amendments on the ballot, and there have been a lot of them, over 200 of them since the 1974 Constitution, too many of them, we would say, too many of them being about minutia, things that really should be in statutory law. There's a lot of problems with the way we handle our Constitution and how often we amend it. We're really unusual in this respect in Louisiana, like we are in many ways. But this particular set of amendments, especially number 1 and 2, and I'm going to talk about number 3 because that directly affects St. Tammany. These are really critical. These are truly important, and these are amendments that improve the Constitution. They don't just add to it. So every year when these are on the ballot, PAR puts out a guide to constitutional amendments. We have one this year. This is the PAR Guide to Constitutional Amendments for 2021. You can go to our website. That's PAR Louisiana, parlouisiana.org, and you can see the full in-depth report. But we also have what we call a mini guide where you can go in if you just want the short version of it, just the appetizer version, get all the central elements. Our guide does not tell you how to vote. Our guide gives you the arguments pro and con and lets you make up your mind. But I mean, I have to say, especially for amendments 1 and 2 this time around, all of our research over the years has shown that these are the reforms that really need to be made. And so when I'm talking about these, especially to groups like this, I'm just saying, I think number 1 and 2 matches the type of reforms that PAR has advocated for so many years, and I think would be very beneficial if they passed. But the guide is something you can distribute, and we hope it's objective. So amendment number 2 is a major tax reform bill. And it begins with the notion that our Constitution on taxes has two very important restrictions in it, the way it is right now. Our tax rate for the individual income tax is locked in at 6% as the top rate, can't go up or down according to the Constitution. And it absolutely requires that when you get a deduction on your federal taxes for federal income taxes paid. This is a really pretty big deal because not very many other states have this. What is this exactly? Well, when you fill out your tax forms and when you pay taxes during the year to the federal government, you can add all that up at the end of the day and take all the taxes you paid and you can deduct it from your income on your state income tax. So you get a deduction for federal income taxes paid on your state form. Yeah, that reduces your income. Yeah, that reduces your taxes. And so in many ways, we think that would be a very positive thing. The reason it's not is we have a really high rate to compensate for that. And we have one of the highest upper rates of tax really in the country. We're I think way up there, like, the 18th highest. And under this reform, we'd go to probably about the 40th highest. And we'd probably retain about the same amount of revenue from the individual income tax. Well, let me explain exactly what happens with this. The constitutional amendment would do two important things. One, it would say the upper rate of the income tax for individual income tax, which is both, by the way, what we call our personal income tax, but it also applies to very many businesses in the state that file under that form. What it would do is the Constitution would say you can't go any higher than 4.75% for the upper rate of the individual income tax. That is a big reduction down from the 6%. And what it also says is that you're not required to have that deduction you're not required to allow that reduction for the federal income taxes. The legislature in statute can decide what to do with that. So that's what the constitutional amendment does. And it triggers 3 statutory measures that implement this. And they're all very important and they're all very sweeping. They're all really positive reforms that Parr and many other analysts have advocated for many years. Reforms that we think will be very good for the economy, really good for stability, both for the taxpayer and the state. And I think instill a better sense of fairness over our whole tax system. So the first bill that gets implemented is on the individual income tax. Well, what we've said in the Constitution, if we pass this, is your highest rate is 4.75%. Well, the statute comes in and says, yeah, we're going to go a little lower. We're going to go to 4.25% on the upper rate of income tax. And we change the other brackets as well, move them down. We have 3 brackets in Louisiana and all of them get adjusted down just a little bit. So it also says, the Constitution says now we're not required to have this deduction for federal taxes paid. We're just going to get rid of it in statute. Now, the legislature could come along later and change their mind on that because now the Constitution would allow that to take place. But this reform would remove it. So basically what you're doing is you're spreading out the tax base and you're lowering rates to a degree to which I think people around the country will really take notice. We will only, there are 9 states that don't have any income tax. So we're not going to compete with them on our income tax rate. But there's only one other state that would have an income tax that would be upper rate, that would be lower than ours if we pass this. And I think that would have tremendous appeal. Now, what would happen? What would happen to your taxes? The overwhelming number of people who pay taxes in Louisiana will find that this has very little effect on the ultimate amount of taxes that they are going to pay. In fact, it's designed to try to be basically revenue neutral, not only for the amount of money that the state will get out of it, even with this change, but also the taxpayers themselves. Now, there will be some taxpayers who will actually be paying a little more and some who will be paying a little less. It'll be relatively marginal, but I tell you what, it's going to be more fair. It's going to be a system in which if you have one of the highest tax rates in your region and even in the country, and you're still only bringing in the amount of revenue that is probably average or below average for most states that have an income tax, then that is not a fair system. Somebody's not paying their fair share. So I do think this system is going to have a great deal of more fairness, great deal more stability. I think it's going to be good for the economy. There have been studies showing it has great job creation possibilities. And I think it'd be good for the state on our image. And it's also going to simplify the tax codes. And these are all the things you look for in a good tax reform policy. But that's not all. If you pass amendment number 2, 2 other really important measures are going to take place. One is you're going to affect the corporate income tax. You're going to get a slight reduction in the upper rate of the corporate income tax. But the most important thing you're going to see is a beginning of Louisiana to start to phase out or address its very toxic franchise tax. Now, I know when most people who talk about the franchise tax, you think I'm talking about McDonald's or Pizza Hut or something, but that's not what it is. The franchise tax is a corporate tax. It's filled out on the same form as the corporate income tax. Most of you people in business are probably already very familiar with it, but it basically taxes retained earnings and it taxes, capital investment money that a company could put back into itself. And Louisiana is really unusual in this franchise tax. For one, we have a really big, expensive franchise tax compared to those states that actually have them. Georgia has something like a franchise tax. It's about a $40 million overall bill. It's really more of a token thing. Arkansas has a similar sort of token charge. Ours is really quite a substantial amount of money. In some years, it's been between $400 and $500 million of total tax obligation that this tax generates. So it's a tax basically that is very harmful to business investment. It's very a disincentive to have headquarters operations in your state. And almost every other state has figured this out. And they've gotten out of it. If you've gone back, 15 years ago, you would have seen more than 20 states that had some form of a franchise tax. One by one, they've all been getting rid of it. There are only 16 states right now that have one, and 4 of those are phasing it out. So we in Louisiana in the last few years have actually expanded ours. So while everyone else has figured this out, they're getting out of it. They're finding other ways to more healthy ways to raise revenue for their state. Louisiana has actually going the opposite way. And I can't tell you what an oddball this makes us out there in the tax world. Getting rid of the franchise tax would be a great step. What this new law would do is it would trigger a franchise tax sort of first steps where really the low taxpayers, it works from the bottom up instead of the top down. And it starts to relieve people from this tax up on the lower levels of those taxpayers, just releasing them from any obligation at all, and also gets you out of this very litigious type of tax as well. This tax is sort of a nightmare for trying to be in compliance for it, and it creates the most problems of any tax in Louisiana as far as compliance. So overall, amendment number 2, it really hits a home run in making a better constitution and making something more flexible. It ignites an individual income tax reform that we wanted to see for a really long time that will be good both for our overall tax system and for our economy. And it will start to address some issues with the corporate tax, but most importantly, the corporate franchise tax, the most toxic tax that we have in Louisiana, and begins to carve away at that, and eventually even lays the foundation for phasing out that franchise tax. And all of this is protected with a kind of economic revenue trigger that is built into this whole tax reform, so that if lo and behold we do these tax reforms and all of a sudden there's this huge amount of revenue that's being raised, as a result of it, hopefully through maybe more economic activity, then the rates will automatically start to chip down a little bit. And so it's a sort of self-regulating tax reform system to keep the budget from inflating and to keep, and if revenue's coming in at a healthy level, taxpayers won't be responsible for paying more and more taxes. So just a great move on Amendment 2, and it basically matches all of the studies, and I would say studies by economists and by people in all political parties going way back, that this is really good for Louisiana. So that's number 2. So if I haven't worn you out on that one, I can talk about number 3, which does have a pretty significant impact, I think, on St. Tammany. And I know I just talked to the chamber folks. They haven't taken a position yet on whether or not they will support number 3. I'm going to give you a very objective view of it. Basically, this amendment number 3 affects certain levy districts in the state of Louisiana. It really only affects about 5 of them. It takes those levy districts that were created since 2006, and it gives them a privilege that all the other levy districts that were created before it had, which is the district board in levy districts across Louisiana before 2006, they would be able to have a 5 mil property tax that they could apply to pay their bills and to build projects and to do their levee and drainage work and their flood control work. And but once 2006 came, you had a number of levy districts that were created where the districts did not have that automatic 5 mils that they could just implement themselves. They have to go to a vote of the people to get those tax increases. And if you look at all the other levy districts around the state, especially like Orleans, for example, they've had lots of votes of the people over the decades that have raised their millages way beyond the 5 mil level. But all these districts that we're talking about really kind of haven't gotten off the ground. And they're looking for this amendment to say, hey, give us the right to have an automatic 5 mils. But here's the interesting part of this amendment. If a local levy district that's affected by this, created since 2006, and this includes St. Tammany, if the voters in your district vote no on this, then St. Tammany, this amendment will not apply to you. There will not be an automatic 5 mil property tax applied to your levy district. In order for this to happen, it has to pass statewide, where 50% plus 1 has to be in favor of this overall amendment, and your levy district voters in St. Tammany are going to also have to vote in a majority to pass this. It is possible that the state could pass it with a majority. St. Tammany could say no, and then some of the other districts could say yes, and they could get their 5 mils if they wanted to. So that's how it plays out. I'll be very interested, and if we want to have some more discussion about this, I think it'll be great. I'm curious to hear what the people in St. Tammany think about what happened in Ida. And I think what happened in Ida may, in some ways influence whether you think you need or do not need this automatic 5 mil tax. If in fact St. Tammany rejects this, you don't have it, it's still possible for the levy district to come forward to ask the people for another vote in the future to see if you want any millages applied. And we looked it up. I believe that if the full 5 mils were charged in St. Tammany, it would raise $11.9 million. Now, that's not to say that the levy district, given the permission, would take the full 5 mils. It might only take 1 or 2 or 3 mils at the beginning, but 11.9 million is the full amount of money that would be driven from that. So amendment number 4, I'll just try to make this one super brief. When the state is facing a budget shortfall, like say the economy tanks and all of a sudden doesn't look like we're going to get as much revenue in the current fiscal year we thought we were, we've got issues, We've already got our spending laid out. We're going to probably run a deficit if we don't change. So the state law requires action to be taken to balance the budget, even within a year in which you're having a budget shortfall. First step that a governor has to take is to go through, and within limits, he can cut spending on state agencies. Once he's reached a certain level of cuts, he then can go and tap revenues from what we call our dedicated revenues or dedicated funds in Louisiana. Some of these funds, especially in the Constitution, are protected from this, but by and large, there's hundreds of funds that the governor can go in and take up to 5% of those funds or 5% of that revenue stream to each of those funds, and put them basically into the general operating budget to balance the budget. So basically what you're voting on is a question of right now, in that emergency situation, the governor gets a 5% sweep on dedicated funds. This amendment would give him 10% sweep for those dedicated funds. The people who are in favor of this say it helps protect from budget cuts, especially for like higher education and healthcare. People who are against it are saying, look, if you want to fix if you want to fix these special dedicated funds, just take care of the funds directly. And also this kind of gives you a safety valve that's a little too generous and could inflate how much we're spending when we actually should be doing more cutting than spending. So there you go, a wrap up of amendments 2, 3, and 4. Hope you could hang with me, and I'm glad to answer questions.
All right, well, thank you very much. Very, very informative. So at this time, we're going to go ahead to the question answer portion of our program. Just remember, if y'all could put your questions in the question answer queue, not the chat feature. And I'm going to go ahead and just start off with the questions. In regards to amendment number 1, what are the objections of the opponents of this amendment?
Speaker, you want to take that? Yep.
I think what I hear the most whenever we are out there on the road and I meet with the locals and across the state. And yesterday I was in Winsboro and met with a lot of those locals and tax collectors out in those areas. And the questions I hear the most are, the state's going to keep our money longer and we're gonna have to wait for it. That's definitely a false. Right now, correct on the remote sellers deal, the state collects those dollars and gets them back within, I think 7 days is what I've heard one of the locals say. So the state will not be collecting the money. It would actually be a portal that it would pass through. And I always kind of use it like I do with you look at the technology we have with our cell phones now through a Venmo process. I think it would be something similar to that, looking at other states, talking to them. That's kind of the way they would operate that. The other is that it would take away jobs and people would lose their local ability. That's simply not true. This is simply a mechanism to create it to make it easier. It will not, if that local area of St. Tammany or whoever decides that they want to keep their locals there, they can 100%. And I actually urge having those people there. I'm one of those guys who like to show up and have a piece of paper in my hand. And I'd say, Mr. Scott, could you explain this to me and why is it this way? That's the relationships I like to have. I like to be able to walk in. So that's the 2 biggest questions that we get from everybody. And I can tell you that both of them are false.
Okay, cool.
Hey, if I could just add to that, if you don't mind. I mean,
no, not at all.
I've been watching these amendments for many years and how they play out. And sometimes you have an amendment that has a big constituency promoting it and a really well-organized opposition, against it. And when we talk about what the opponents say to amendment number 1, it's not really that case. You don't have a big organized opposition to this. And it's not the case, in case somebody maybe thinks so, that there's an organized effort on the part of local governments to defeat this. In fact, everybody's gotten together on this, and you have some local governments who are either supportive or neutral on it. And of course, we are yet to sort of implement it with a statute, which will be the next step in it. And then you'll see, you'll have a lot of locals issues that will greet these concerns when we're doing the statute. So I don't see this as your traditional, big group against it, big group for it. I think everybody sort of says, come on, let's try this. And then we can continue to work out the details as we go along.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
and Michael, the only other thing I would add to that, and this is where, I give the speaker a lot of credit. I think the reason for that is we brought everybody to the table at the beginning. It wasn't like the legislature went out and designed something and then tried to go get local governments on board. The municipal association, the police jury, the school board, and the sheriffs all signed off on this amendment as we were putting the pieces together. And so that's very important to happen because they supported it. And I don't remember the vote total. Mark or the speaker may remember, I think it got nearly 100 votes out of the 105 House members. So it'd be a little disingenuous, I think, for those groups to now come after they helped put this together. And as the speaker mentioned, we had to hold the line and make sure that there were no amendments that would have lost their support. And so a lot of those things and that hard work went on the front end.
Very well. Okay. And just I guess to continue, the next question is, if the franchise tax, this goes to amendment number 2, the franchise tax has been generating $400 to $500 million for the state. What is being proposed to replace that income for the state?
Yeah. And I'll jump in here and I'll let Robert Travis also jump in, or the speaker or Mark. So first of all, the $400 or $500 million is the entire, if you will, revenue that the franchise tax generates. Michael, they're not eliminating the entire, it's not a light switch and we're getting rid of the entire tax. So it is still going to bring in some revenue. A lot of times, and I've worked on reform packages for I can't tell you how long in this state and other states. A lot of times what you will see is a transition or a phase out. And that's what Robert Travis was talking about, is that this is being phased out. In fact, when we first knew we were entering into the pandemic, again, the speaker and president stood up what was called the Louisiana Economic Recovery Task Force. And Representative Mark Wright was tremendous in carrying a number of those instruments to help with small businesses and the recovery. One of those measures was the suspension of the franchise tax for small business owners. And we in fact, I worked with Robert Travis Scott on this. I think we were able to eliminate the franchise tax as a whole for about 90% of the filers, and it only cost the state about 10 to 13 million, which lets you know that a lot of the larger businesses and the multi-state, multinational businesses that are actually paying the franchise tax. And when you look at this income tax package, what is happening here, and one of the things that's of note, is there are 4 bills. There's 3 statutory and 1 constitutional amendment. And Michael, they're all tied together. So if this amendment number 2 doesn't pass, none of this stuff on the franchise tax or the rate reduction or any of that goes into effect. But because it's tied together, you have to look at the corporate income tax changes and the franchise tax changes together. And when you do that, it becomes a revenue neutral exercise, because you're getting rid of the federal income tax deduction, which is generating some revenue for the state. And we didn't reduce the rates as low as we could because we wanted to use some of that rate reduction to phase out the franchise tax. That way it gave corporate taxpayers a little bit of the bite of both apples. You're getting a rate reduction, plus you're getting some of the franchise tax. If we weren't eliminating or phasing out the franchise tax, we probably could have dropped those rates a little bit more. But corporate income tax works a lot different than individual income tax because of the unique way that companies are set up. Some may pay a little more in franchise tax, some may pay a little bit more in the corporate income tax. And we were trying to strike that right balance between rate reduction and phasing out the franchise tax.
Fantastic. Robert, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, basically, no, we're not getting rid of the whole 4 or 5 minute obligation. In fact, the net revenue we get from the franchise tax is reduced by the fact that so many exemptions are taken against it. So the state doesn't really net out anywhere near that much in terms of actual revenue. But, you know, the simple answer to your question is, first of all, we won't be getting a lot of the big taxpayers of franchise tax, even with this reform, are going to continue to pay it, and they pay the majority of it. But you also have a lot of corporate income tax that's going to be taking the slack away from what's been happening with the franchise tax. So as the franchise tax goes down, the corporate tax revenues, by and large, will probably increase and take over some of that. So you're basically taxing profit, which I think a lot of people, you know, in the tax world are much more comfortable with than taxing people whether they make profit or not. A wealth tax, an antiquated tax, a toxic tax, that's really a disincentive to business investment. I'd much rather take the corporate tax.
And Michael, one of the other things that we were talking about is just keep in mind, we're trying to make Louisiana more competitive. And we used to compare ourselves to the Texas and the Floridas. Well, guess what? Right there, a neighbor to St. Tammany is Mississippi, and they've phased out the franchise tax. And their national rankings and their perception according to many organizations is better than Louisiana's. And one of the reasons is they were trying to eliminate income tax as a whole. They've begun to eliminate the franchise tax. And so we used to like to say we're keeping up with Texas and Florida. Now we're struggling just to keep up with, with Mississippi. So that makes it tough.
Oh, I fully understand. Well, one question that came as y'all were answering this, one participant asked, where has that $400 million for the franchise tax? Like, where has that been going? Like, where is it? How does it get spent in this state?
Well, I'm gonna leave it to some of the legislators, but the short answer is that that's general fund money, Michael. So tax revenue is general fund money. It does not have any specific dedication. And so, without getting too weedsy into the budget process, as you all know, the governor and the administration kind of set what they would like to see in the executive budget. They have hearings on it prior to the session. And then the speaker and the House and the president and the Senate, they all get to weigh in and come up with how they would like to see all of our tax revenues spent. So
yeah, and let's not leave everybody with the impression that if you pass amendment number 2, that we're going to lose $400 or $500 million in franchise tax revenue. That just isn't going to happen. That's not how this is designed to do. I was mentioning that so you could see the relative amount that we pay versus other states. So no, there's still going to be basically the same amount of revenue going in. There may be over the long term a very slight decrease according to the Legislative Fiscal Office. Over time, there may be a little less revenue over maybe a 5-year period, but by and large, the franchise tax revenue will go down. Corporate income tax probably revenues will go up a little bit. Plus, there's all these triggers in there, which which will also help compensate for this over the long run. That would be the only way. When Mississippi got rid of it, they kissed it goodbye and said, we're phasing it out, period, there it goes. Louisiana has triggers involved so that it won't fully phase out unless we're able to sustain that revenue. So all those concerns about losing that revenue, Michael, are really have been addressed with this.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, that's the end of our questions. Let's see, we have one more that just came in. Are there any companies right now that you're aware of that are looking to coming into Louisiana if this passes?
Well, look, I'll hit on that from just my everyday job duties and what I do kind of for a living. And that is, we work with companies that are either looking to expand or relocate to Louisiana. And, I'm not going to sit here and say, Michael, that their entire decision-making process comes down to our tax structure. There are other things, quality of life, education system, crime, transportation system, all of those things. But I will tell you, and I've done this on both sides of the aisle, when I was with the Revenue Department under the previous governor, and I would go around the country promoting Louisiana with the Economic Development Secretary. It was Moray at the time. But companies do absolutely take our tax structure and our system into account. And one of the things that scares them the most is our sales tax system. And the reason is because they realize, unlike other states, when they move to Louisiana, how much in resources am I going to now have to use to navigate the administrative system? I'm also not going to get into some of the other things like ITEP. That used to be a very simple process to go and get approvals. The governor obviously changed that via executive order, and there's a lot of complications there. But just the overall complexity of our tax structure causes businesses to spend more time with the administrative burden of our system than what they want to do, producing products and goods and manufacturing and that sort of thing. And we do have to clean that up in order to be competitive. And that is an issue that they definitely take into consideration before coming or relocating or expanding in Louisiana.
And listen,
Anyone else
Mike,
want-
everything we're doing with Amendment 1 and 2, it's more simple, it's more fair, it's going to be less friction on commerce, and it's going to do wonders for our image.
Sounds good. Speaker, anything else?
You know, and Jason hit on it, and Robert did as well. When you look at what Mississippi has done, and I had conversations with the Speaker of the House over there, who, you know, I joked at him as well. We used to always brag. We were always one above them. Always, they were always honest. I can tell you, over his reign over there as Speaker of the House, they have done a fantastic job in doing some reforms that made them look a lot better. And just in those few reforms that they went out and done, they have attracted a lot of new industry into their state that they normally wouldn't have gotten. He was very blunt about it, that it made a huge difference there. And I think it'll make a difference here when people start looking at us and they see us moving in that right direction. I think the Senate President always says it's right. You know, we're battling long history of bad tax policy in our state, and it's like a ship out at sea. You're trying to turn it. It takes a while to turn it, but I think this is the first turn where you actually see that ship starting to turn. If we get these amendments passed and get it done, I think you start to see it turn a lot quicker as we move forward.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, I really appreciate, the chamber appreciates all the effort and the time you put into explaining these amendments. I can tell you I have a much better understanding of them for the election coming up. And I hope all you all that are watching today also, understand that this election is going to be on November the 13th. So I encourage you to stay involved, speak to your neighbors, your other business associates, let them know what's going on this. We need more engagement in our community when it comes to these amendments to make sure people go out and vote. That's our right to do so. Make sure that takes a place. Moving forward, just to let you know about the next webinar that Lacey talked about in the beginning, is going to be the 4-cent sales tax. And that will be on Tuesday, October the 5th. That's going to be at 9 a.m. So you can go on right now and register for that webinar as well. So we hope you attend. I want to thank the speakers, the panelists, all for being here today. This was a great session. I appreciate your time. And I thank everyone. This recording of this will be available to you later this afternoon. So if you would like to replay it or send it to someone else, let them know that it's available. So thanks again for joining us today. And we appreciate your time.
Thank y'all.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Lacey. Appreciate it.
Thank you.